Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom called Adasi, there lived a king named Igwe Okanga and his wife Lolo Okanga. Igwe Okanga was a very nice man, loved and respected by his people. He led them with love and kindness, ensuring peace and happiness in the kingdom. Everyone in Adasi adored Igwe Okanga and held him dear to their hearts. Igwe Okanga and Lolo Okanga had a beautiful daughter named Nwedo. She was not only stunningly beautiful, but also tall and fierce. Since she was a little girl, Nwedo had been by her father's side, learning everything about ruling the kingdom. She believed that one day she would take over as the leader after her father. Nwedo, my dear, Lolo Kanga would often say, "You are brave and strong. You will rule our people with grace and wisdom." Nwedo smiled at her mother, feeling proud and determined. She was not like most girls in the kingdom. She learned combat and could fight as well as any warrior. She believed she was meant to be a leader, just like a man. Nwedo had two best friends, Obiagu and Nkwo. Unlike most girls, Nwedo didn't keep female friends. She felt she was meant to be a man, and Obiagu and Nkwo shared her passion for adventure and bravery. They would often ride their horses together, galloping through the fields and heading to the kingdom square for their evening training sessions. "Let's go, Obiagu and Nkwo. We must be swift and strong," Nwedo would call out as they prepared for their training. Obiagu, a tall and muscular young man, nodded with a grin. "Yes, Nwedo, we are ready." Nkwo, equally strong and determined, added, "We will train hard and become the best warriors in the kingdom." The three friends would spend hours practicing their combat skills, sparring with each other and perfecting their techniques. Nwedo was fierce in battle, showing great strength and agility. She often led her friends in their training, teaching them new moves and strategies. "You fight like a true warrior, Nwedo," Obiagu said one evening as they practiced at the kingdom square. "Thank you, Obiagu," Nwedo replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "We must be ready for anything. Our kingdom depends on us." Nwedo was not just a skilled warrior, she was also a great leader. She often went to war with her army, bringing victory and power back to Adasi. Her bravery and strength were admired by all, and her father, the king, was incredibly proud of her. "My daughter, you make me proud," Igwe Okanga would say as he embraced Nwedo after a victorious battle. "You will be a great leader one day." "I will make you proud, father," Nwedo replied, her eyes shining with determination. Lolo Kanga, too, was proud of her daughter. She watched Nwedo grow into a strong and confident young woman, ready to take any challenge. "Nwedo, you have the heart of a lion and the wisdom of an elder," she would say. "You will lead our people with strength and grace." Nwedo's friends, Obiago and Nkwo, were always by her side. They supported her and believed in her leadership. They often joked about the future, imagining themselves as chiefs in Nwedo's kingdom. "Nwedo, when you become the ruler, we will be your chiefs," Obiago would say with a laugh. "Yes, and we will help you lead the kingdom to greatness," Nkwo added, smiling. The three friends would laugh together, dreaming of the future. They were a strong team, united by their love for their kingdom and their determination to protect it. One evening, As they rode their horses back to the palace after training, Wedo looked at her friends and said, "We must always be ready to defend our kingdom. We are the future of Adasi." Obiago nodded. "Yes, Wedo, we will stand by you always." Nkwo added, "Together, we will keep Adasi safe and prosperous." The three friends shared a deep bond, built on trust and mutual respect. They knew that together, they could achieve anything. As they approached the palace, they saw Igwe Okanga and Lolo Okanga waiting for them. The king smiled warmly at his daughter and her friends. "Welcome back, brave warriors," he said. "How was your training?" "It was excellent, father," Wedo replied. "We are stronger and more prepared than ever." "That is good to hear," Igwe Okanga said. "Our kingdom needs strong and brave leaders like you." Lolo Okanga added, "I am proud of all of you. You are the future of Adasi, and I know you will lead our people with wisdom and courage." Wedo and her friends felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. They knew that they had a great task ahead of them, but they were ready for the challenge. As the sun set over the beautiful kingdom of Adasi, Wedo, Obiago, and Nkwo stood together, looking out over their homeland. They knew that the future held many challenges, but they were confident in their abilities and their bond as friends and warriors. "We will protect Adasi, no matter what," Wedo said firmly. "Yes, we will," Obiago and Nkwo echoed. Life continued as usual in the kingdom of Adasi. The sun rose and set, the people worked and played, and the kingdom thrived under the kind rule of Igwe Okanga. But one day, something unexpected happened that shook the entire kingdom. A young man named Nweze arrived in Adasi, claiming that Igwe Okanga was his father. Nweze was a handsome young man with bright eyes and a strong build. His presence caused a stir among the people, and soon word reached the king. "I need to speak to the king," Nweze declared to the guards at the palace gates. The guards, curious and cautious, allowed Nweze to enter the palace. He was taken to the throne room, where Igwe Okanga sat in his regal attire, a look of confusion on his face. "Who are you?" Igwe Okanga asked, his voice calm but firm. "I am Nweze, and you are my father," Nweze replied confidently. The king was shocked. He had no recollection of this young man. How can this be? He wondered aloud. To find answers, Igwe Okanga summoned the Ezemo, the spiritual advisor and the seer of the kingdom. When the Ezemo arrived, he entered the throne room with a grave expression. "Your Majesty," the Ezemo began, bowing deeply. "I have seen this vision before. Your first child has returned, and it has come to pass." Igwe Okanga was even more perplexed. "What do you mean? I do not understand." The Ezemo continued. "Do you remember when you were a prince during the reign of your father? There was a maid named Ncheteka." The king's eyes widened as memories flooded back. "Yes, I remember Ncheteka. She disappeared suddenly many years ago." The Ezemo nodded. "Indeed, you had an affair with Ncheteka, and she disappeared because she was carrying your child. She ran away, fearing the consequences. That child is Nweze." Igwe Okanga was speechless. He turned to look at Nweze, who stood tall and proud. The Ezemo continued. "Nweze is your son, and he is destined to be the next king of Adas." With that, the Ezemo bowed and left the throne room, leaving Igwe Okanga in a state of shock. He quickly summoned his chiefs to share the startling news. Later that night, Igwe Okanga sat in the throne room with Nweze, discussing the day's events. He had called for Lolo Okanga and Wedo to join them, hoping to introduce Nweze to his family. Lolo, Wedo, please come in, Igwe Okanga called as they approached. Lolo Okanga entered first, followed by Wedo. They both looked curious and a bit anxious. This is Nweze, Igwe Okanga said, gesturing to the young man beside him. He has come to us with a claim that I am his father. Wedo's eyes narrowed as she looked at Nweze. This cannot be true, she said, shaking her head. I have worked hard all my life to become the next ruler of Adasi. Igwe Okanga tried to calm his daughter. Wedo, please listen. The Ezemo has confirmed that Nweze is my son and the rightful heir. Wedo's face turned red with anger. No, this is impossible, she shouted. I will not accept it. Lolo Kanga, equally shocked and upset, placed a hand on Wedo's shoulder. Wedo, we must try to understand this. Let's talk about it calmly. But Wedo was too upset to listen. She stormed out of the throne room, her heart filled with disappointment and anger. Lolo Kanga also felt troubled by the news. She looked at her husband, sadness in her eyes. I need some time to think, she said quietly, excusing herself and leaving the throne room. Igwe Kanga watched them leave, feeling a deep sense of sadness. He turned to Nweze, who stood silently. Do not worry, Nweze, the king said, trying to reassure him. They will come around in time. Nweze nodded, though he looked uncertain. I hope so, Your Majesty, he said. I did not mean to cause any trouble. You have not caused trouble, Igwe Kanga replied. This is just a lot for everyone to take in. We'll get through this together. Nweze nodded again, feeling a mix of emotions. He had always dreamed of meeting his father, but he had not expected it to be so complicated. He hoped that in time, he would be accepted by his new family and the people of Adasi. As the night grew darker, Igwe Kanga and Nweze sat together, discussing the future. The king shared stories of the kingdom, while Nweze listened intently, eager to learn about his heritage. Meanwhile, Wedo sat alone in her room, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. She had always believed she would be the next ruler, and now her dreams seemed to be slipping away. She thought about all the training and hard work she had put in, and tears filled her eyes. I won't give up, Wedo whispered to herself. I will find a way to prove myself. In another part of the palace, Lolo Kanga sat quietly, thinking about the day's event. She felt a deep sense of betrayal and confusion. She loved her husband dearly, but this news had shaken her to the core. She knew she had to find a way to come to terms with it, for the sake of the kingdom. As the palace fell silent, everyone was lost in their thoughts, trying to make sense of the changes that had come so suddenly. The arrival of Nweze had set many things in motion, and it was clear that the future of Adasi would be different from what anyone had expected. But Igwe Okanga remained hopeful. He believed that in time, his family would accept Nweze, and that together they would continue to lead the kingdom with love and wisdom. The road ahead might be challenging, but with patience and understanding, they could overcome any obstacle. The next morning, Nweze was in his chamber, thinking about all that had happened since he arrived in Adasi. He was trying to understand his new life when Wedo suddenly walked in. She looked very angry, her eyes blazing with fury. Nweze, Wedo said, her voice trembling with anger. You need to leave. The throne belongs to me and me alone. Wenze looked at her calmly, trying to reason with her. Wedo, please listen. I did not come here to take anything from you. I only want to know my father and my family. Wedo shook her head, refusing to listen. No, you are here to take what is mine. If you do not leave, I will destroy you. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, her anger palpable. As she walked down the corridor, she ran into her mother, Lolo Kanga. Wedo, where are you coming from? Lolo Kanga asked, seeing the fierce look on her daughter's face. From the stranger's room, Wedo replied coldly. Lolo Kanga frowned. Mweze is not a stranger, Wedo. He is part of our family. No, mother, it's all a setup. Can't you see? Wedo exclaimed. Maybe the Ezemo sent him here to pretend to be the king's son, so they can take the kingship away from our family. Lolo Kanga's eyes widened with shock. Wedo, you are speaking abomination. How can you say such things? It's what I believe, mother. Wedo insisted, her voice defiant. Lolo Kanga took a deep breath and said, come with me to my chambers. We need to talk. Reluctantly, Wedo followed her mother to her chambers. Once inside, Lolo Kanga closed the door and turned to her daughter. Wedo, you must understand that Nweze is your brother. This is not a plot or a trick. He is part of our family now. Lolo Kanga said gently. But mother, Wedo protested. I have worked so hard to be the next ruler. How can I just accept this? I know you have, my dear, Lolo Kanga replied, her voice soft and understanding. But we must trust the Ezemo's vision. We must believe that everything happens for a reason. Wedo looked down, her anger slowly turning into confusion. I don't know if I can accept this, mother. Give it time, Lolo Kanga said, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. You will see that Nweze means no harm. He just wants to be part of our family. Meanwhile, back at the throne room, Igwe Kanga sat on his throne, deep in thought. The recent events had weighed heavily on his mind. He was lost in his thoughts when Nweze approached him. Good morning, Your Majesty, Nweze greeted, bowing respectfully. Igwe Kanga looked up and smiled warmly. Good morning, Nweze. It is good to see you. Nweze smiled back, feeling a bit more at ease. Thank you, Your Majesty. I wanted to speak to you about something. Of course, come and sit with me, Igwe Kanga said, gesturing to a chair nearby. Nweze sat down, feeling a mix of gratitude and worry. Your Majesty, I am very grateful for your kindness, but I am also worried. Wedo does not accept me, and I fear that Lolo Kanga may not want me around either. Igwe Kanga sighed and placed a reassuring hand on Nweze's shoulder. Nweze, do not worry. This is a difficult situation for everyone, but in time, they will come to accept you. You are my son, and I will see you through everything in this palace. Nweze nodded, feeling a bit more hopeful. Thank you, Your Majesty. I will do my best to be worthy of your trust. You already are, Nweze, Igwe Kanga said with a smile. We will face these challenges together. As they talked, Wedo sat in her mother's chambers, trying to process everything. She had always believed she would be the next ruler, and now everything seemed uncertain. Mother, how can I ever accept this? Wedo asked, her voice filled with frustration. With time and understanding, Lolo Kanga replied gently. You must see Nweze for who he is, your brother. He is not here to take anything from you. But I have worked so hard, mother, Wedo said, her eyes filling with tears. I wanted to make father proud. And you have, Lolo Kanga said, hugging her daughter. You have made us all proud, and you will continue to do so, no matter what happens. In the throne room, Igwe Kanga continued to reassure Nweze. Do not worry about Nwedo. She is strong-willed, but she will come around. And Lolo Kanga will also see the truth in time. I hope so, Your Majesty, Nweze said, feeling a bit more at ease. She will, Igwe Kanga said confidently. We are a family, and we'll get through this together. As the day went on, the tensions in the palace began to settle, but the challenges were far from over. Wenze knew that gaining the acceptance of his new family would take time and effort, but with the support of Igwe Okanga, he felt hopeful. Mwedo, on the other hand, struggled with her feelings. She knew deep down that her mother was right, but accepting Wenze as her brother was a difficult pill to swallow. She had always been the one to stand by her father's side, and now everything seemed to be changing. Mother, I don't know if I can do this, Mwedo said, her voice breaking. You can, my dear. Lolo Kanga replied softly. You are strong and brave. You will find a way to accept Mweze and continue to make us proud. Mwedo nodded, wiping her tears. I will try, mother. I will try. Mwedo continued to avoid Mweze. She don't like speaking to him or even seeing him. To escape his presence, she decided to leave the palace every morning, returning late at night. She doubled her training time with her friends, finding solace in the rigorous routines. Mweze, on the other hand, tried to fit into the palace life. One day, he had a heartfelt conversation with Lolo Ikenga. She had initially been unsure about him, but over time, she saw his genuine nature and accepted him into the palace. Mweze, I want you to know that you are now part of this family, Lolo Kanga said warmly. Thank you, Lolo. Your acceptance means a lot to me, Mweze replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Despite his acceptance, Mwedo's attitude towards Mweze remained cold. She and her friends, Obiago and Nkwo, continued their intense training sessions. One day, as they were practicing, Nkwo noticed Mwedo's troubled expression. Mwedo, why do you look so sad? Nkwo asked, concern in his voice. Before Mwedo could respond, Obiago snapped. Nkwo, why are you asking Mwedo such stupid questions? Don't you know about the stranger trying to take her place? Nkwo sighed, shaking his head. Mwedo, do you really think you can become a king as a woman in Adasi kingdom? Never in the history of kingship has a woman become king. Mwedo's eyes widened with anger. What are you trying to say, Nkwo? She demanded. Nkwo continued consciously. Even if Mweze didn't show up, you would have to pick a husband who would then become the king. It's just how things are. Mwedo's anger boiled over. She drew her sword, pointing it at Nkwo. How dare you speak to me like that? Obiago quickly stepped between them, pleading. Mwedo, please calm down. Nkwo didn't mean to upset you. Mwedo hesitated, then stepped back, lowering her sword. My father, the king, and my mother were willing to do anything to make me the king until the impostor showed up, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Never talk to me like that again, Nkwo, or you will no longer be my friend. Nkwo looked down, feeling remorseful. I'm sorry, Mwedo. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted you to tread carefully. Mwedo nodded, accepting his apology, but still feeling the weight of his words. She continued her training, pushing herself harder, trying to drown out the doubt that Nkwo's words had stirred in her mind. That night, as Mwedo returned to the palace, she was exhausted both physically and emotionally. As she approached her chamber, she saw Nweze standing in front of her door. Her anger flared up again. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, drawing her sword once more. "Wait though, I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to talk," Nweze said, trying to stay calm. "Leave my chambers immediately," Wedo commanded, her voice shaking with anger. Nweze, not wanting to cause more trouble, stepped back. "All right, I'm leaving," he said softly. As Nweze walked away, Wedo watched him, tears streaming down her face. She felt a mix of frustration, sadness, and helplessness. With a heavy heart, she forcefully pushed her door open and entered her chamber, slamming the door behind her. Inside her room, Widow sank to the floor, her sword clattering beside her. She buried her face in her hands, letting the tears flow freely. She felt torn between her dreams of becoming a ruler and the reality that seemed to be slipping away from her grasp. Meanwhile, Wenze walked slowly back to his own chamber, feeling the stench of rejection. He had hoped to find a way to connect with Wedo, to make her see that he wasn't there to take anything from her. But it seemed that every attempt only pushed her further away. The next morning, Wedo woke up with a heavy heart. She dressed quickly and headed out for her training, hoping to find some peace in the familiar routines. As she rode her horse to the training ground, she couldn't shake the conversation with Nkwo from her head. At the training ground, Wedo and her friends went through their exercises. Obiago and Nkwo could sense that something was troubling her, but they didn't press the issue. "Wedo, if you ever need to talk, we are here for you," Obiago said gently. "Thank you, Obiago," Wedo replied, managing a smile. "I just need to keep training. It helps clear my mind." As the day went on, Wedo pushed herself harder and harder, determined to prove herself. She wanted to show everyone that she was capable of being a leader, despite the doubts that others might have. In the palace, Lolo Kanga watched her daughter with concern. She knew that Wedo was struggling, and she wished she could find a way to help her. She also hoped that Wedo would eventually come to accept Nweze and find peace with the situation. "Nweze, I know this is difficult for you too," Lolo Kanga said one day as they spoke. "But please, be patient with Wedo. She just needs time." "I understand, Lolo. I will do my best to give her space and time," Nweze replied. As the days passed, Wedo continued to train relentlessly. She still avoided Nweze, unable to face him without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't keep running from the situation forever. Soon, Nweze was officially crowned the Crown Prince of Adasi. The chiefs gathered in the grand hall, dressed in their finest attire, and the ceremony was conducted with great pomp and splendor. Igwe Okanga stood proudly as he placed the royal crown on Nweze's head, signaling his acceptance and new role in the kingdom. "Nweze, you are now the crown prince of Adasi. May you lead with wisdom and honor," Igwe Okanga declared, his voice ringing with authority and pride. Nweze bowed deeply, feeling a mix of gratitude and responsibility. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am honored and humbled by this great responsibility." The chiefs cheered and applauded, welcoming Nweze as their new leader. Lolo Kanga congratulated him with a warm smile, saying, "Nweze, you have our support. We believe in you." "Thank you, Lolo. I will do my best to serve our kingdom," Nweze replied sincerely. As the ceremony continued, Wedo was nowhere to be seen. She had locked herself in her chambers, heartbroken and devastated. She couldn't bear to witness the event that she had dreamed of for so long, now happening for someone else. After the coronation, Wednesday addressed the chiefs, expressing his gratitude. "Thank you all for accepting me. I promise to lead with fairness and dedication, just like my father, Igwe Okanga. The chiefs nodded in approval, their faces reflecting a mixture of respect and expectation. Lolo Kanga watched with pride, but also concern for her daughter. She went to Wedo's chamber, hoping to talk to her, but the door remained firmly shut. Wedo, please open the door. We need to talk. Lolo Kanga pleaded gently. There was no response from inside. Wedo remained silent, her heart heavy with sorrow. She couldn't face anyone, especially not Nweze, who had taken everything she had worked so hard for. The next morning, Wedo left the palace early, heading to the training grounds to wrestle with her friends. She needed to release her frustration and anger. As she trained, she confided in Obiago and Nkwo about her feelings. I want to harm Nweze, so he will leave, Wedo confessed, her eyes filled with determination. Obiago, always ready for action, suggested, maybe we should kill him. That would solve everything. Nkwo immediately shook his head, his expression serious. No, that's a dangerous idea. We could bring curses upon ourselves and the kingdom. Nwedo, however, was not swayed. I want him out of the palace, Nkwo. I don't care how. Obiago thought for a moment and then said, what if we kidnap him and lock him up in a deserted house in our kingdom? He won't be able to interfere then. Wedo's eyes lit up with a wicked smile. That's it. We will kidnap him. Nkwa continued to protest, his voice pleading. Wedo, this is a bad idea. We should let him be. It's too risky. But Wedo and Obiago were resolute. Nkwa, if you try to tell anyone about this, I will have your head. Wedo warned, her tone cold and threatening. Nkwa sighed deeply, feeling trapped. All right, but I still think it's a mistake. They began to plan the details of the kidnapping. Obiago outlined the first step. You need to pretend you have accepted him, Wedo. Show him that you want to be friends. Then, ask you show him around the kingdom. Wedo nodded, liking the plan. Yes, that's perfect. I will make him believe I have had a change of heart. That day, when Wedo returned to the palace, she put on a cheerful smile and headed to Wenze's chamber. Wenze was surprised to see her smiling for the first time since his arrival. Wedo, it's good to see you, Wenze said, standing up to greet her. Wenze, I want to apologize for everything, Wedo began, her voice soft and sincere. I have been unfair to you, and I realize that now. Can we start over? Wenze's face lit up with relief and happiness. Of course, Wedo. I have always wanted us to get along. I'm so glad to hear this. Great, Wedo replied, still smiling. How about we have dinner together tonight? We can talk and get to know each other better. I would love that, Weze said. Thank you, Wedo. That evening, Wedo and Weze sat down for dinner in the grand dining hall. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, filled with laughter and conversation. They talked about their interests, shared stories, and laughed together, as if they had always been close. Weze, tell me more about your journey before you came here. Wedo said, genuinely interested. Well, it wasn't easy, Wedo began, his eyes reflecting the struggles he had faced. But I always believed I would find my family one day. And now that I am here, I feel like I have finally found my place. Wedo nodded, her expression thoughtful. I'm glad you feel that way, Weze. I think we can make a great team. As the night went on, Wedo's smile never wavered. She played her part perfectly, convincing Weze that she had truly accepted him. Deep inside, she knew that this was just the beginning of their plan to get rid of him. After dinner, Weze walked Wedo back to her chamber. Thank you for tonight, Wedo. It means a lot to me, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. You are welcome, Weze. I'm glad we could spend time together. Wedo replied, maintaining her warm facade. As she entered her chamber, Wedo felt a pang of guilt, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had a goal, and she was determined to achieve it no matter what. That night, Wedo lay in her bed thinking about the plan. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't let Nweze take everything from her. She would do whatever it took to protect her place and her future. The next morning, Wedo met Obiago and Unko at their usual training spot. Everything is set. She told them, Nweze believes I have accepted him. The next step is to get him alone. Obiago grinned, pleased with the progress. Good job, Wedo. We will be ready when you give the signal. Nkwo still looked uneasy, but he nodded in agreement. Just be careful, Wedo. We don't want anything to go wrong. Don't worry, Nkwo. We have got this, Wedo replied confidently. As they continued their training, Wedo felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the path she had chosen was dangerous, but she was willing to take the risk. For her, there was no turning back. Back at the palace, Wenze felt hopeful for the first time since his arrival. He believed that he was finally beginning to bond with his new family, especially Wedo. Little did he know that behind her smiles and kind words, a plan was unfolding that could change everything. Unaware of the plot against him, Wenze grew very close to Wedo. He cherished the moments they spent together, believing that their bond was growing stronger. One sunny afternoon, Wedo suggested they take a walk around the kingdom. Wenze, would you like to explore the outskirts of the kingdom with me? Wedo asked with a bright smile. I would love that, Wedo. Wenze replied happily. It sounds like a great idea. They left the palace on their horses, riding together through the bustling streets and out into the peaceful countryside. As they approached a lonely path, Wenze felt a sense of calm, enjoying the serenity of the place. But just then, Nko and Obiago emerged from their hiding spot, startling Wenze. What is going on? Wenze asked, confusion and fear in his voice. Without a word, Nko and Obiago grabbed Wenze, holding him down. They dragged him into the dense bush nearby, ignoring his struggles and pleas. Wedo, what is happening? Wenze shouted, hoping for an explanation. Inside the bush, they tied Wenze to a tree, securing him tightly with ropes. Wedo watches with a cold smile on her face. Who is the winner now, Wenze? Wedo taunted, her voice dripping with malice. Wedo, please let me go, Wenze begged, his voice wide with desperation. I thought we were friends. Wedo laughed triumphantly. I never liked you, Wenze. I will do everything in my power to take you out of my way. Wenze's heart sank as he realized the depth of Wedo's hatred. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice breaking. Because the throne is mine, and I will not let you take it from me, Wedo replied, her eyes blazing with determination. Wenze tried to plead with her again, but Wedo turned her back on him. She and her friends left him there, tied to the tree, and walked back to the kingdom. As they rode back, Nkwo spoke up, his voice filled with doubt. Wedo, I don't feel comfortable with what we did. It's wrong. Obiako quickly shut him down. Be quiet, Nkwo. We did what we had to do. Wedo warned him sternly. Nkwo, keep your mouth shut. We cannot afford any mistakes. Feeling helpless, Nkwo fell silent, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. Back in the bush, Wenze struggled against the ropes, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't shout for help because his mouth had been sealed with a cloth. Despair washed over him as he realized the gravity of his situation. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Lolo Kanga grew concerned when Wedo returned without Wenze. Wedo, where is Wenze? Lolo Kanga asked, her brow furrowed with worry. Wedo lied smoothly. Wenze saw a beautiful lady and followed her. I went to train with my friends and haven't seen him since then. Lolo Kanga was surprised but decided to wait. That's unusual, but perhaps he would return soon. Wedo nodded, pretending to be unconcerned. I'm sure he will, mother. As the evening wore on, Lolo Kanga's worry deepened. She kept glancing towards the door, hoping to see Wenze walk through it, but there was no sign of him. Wedo, if you see Wenze, tell him to come and see me immediately, Lolo Kanga instructed. Of course, mother, Wedo replied, maintaining her calm facade. But inside, Wedo felt a mix of triumph and fear. She knew that what they had done was dangerous, but she believed it was necessary to secure her place as the future ruler of Adasi. As the night grew darker, Wenzel remained tied to the tree in the bush, exhausted and frightened. He couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. He had come to Adasi, hoping to find his family and a place to belong. But now, he was alone and in danger. In the palace, Wedo lay in her bed, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of the day's event. She knew she had to stay strong and not let any doubt creep in. Her ambition and desire for the throne drove her, but she couldn't shake the small voice in her head that questioned her actions. Nkwo too lay awake, troubled by guilt. He had gone along with the plan, but now he regretted it deeply. He knew that what they had done was wrong, and he feared the consequences. He worried about Wenze's fate and the possible repercussions for all of them. Obiago, however, felt no such doubt. He believed that they had done what was necessary to protect Nwedo's future. He was determined to support her no matter what. The next morning, as the sun rose over Adas, the palace was filled with a sense of unease. Lolo Kanga's concern for Wenze grew, and she began to ask more questions. Wedo, are you sure you haven't seen Wenze since yesterday? Lolo Kanga asked again, her voice tinged with suspicion. I'm sure, mother, Wedo replied, keeping her expression neutral. He followed that lady, and I haven't seen him since. Lolo Kanga sighed, feeling a deep sense of worry. She decided to send some guards to search for Wenze, hoping that he was safe. As the guards set out to look for Wenze, Wedo's anxiety increased. She knew that if they found him, everything would be exposed. She had to hope that Wenze remained hidden and that their plan would not be discovered. In the bush, Wenze had spent a long and harrowing night. He was weak and hungry, but his spirit remained unbroken. He hoped that someone would find him soon and help him escape. The guards searched the kingdom, asking people if they had seen Wenze, but their efforts were in vain, as Wenze remained tied to the tree, hidden from sight. As the day wore on, Wedo, Obiago, and Nkwo met again to discuss their next move. We need to make sure no one finds him, Wedo said, her voice firm. Obiago agreed. We should check on him tonight and make sure he's still there. Nkwo, still filled with guilt, hesitated. Wedo, are you sure about this? What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong, Wedo replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. We have to see this through. As the sun set, they prepared to visit the bush where Wenze was hidden. The palace remained unaware of the dark secret that lay just beyond its walls. Igwe Okanga grew increasingly worried about Wenze's absence. He decided to summon the Ezemo once more, hoping for guidance. When the Ezemo arrived, the king quickly narrated the audio, explaining how Wenze had disappeared without a trace. The Ezemo was silent for a long time, his eyes closed in deep thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with a mysterious calm. Your Majesty, Wenze is alive and within the boundaries of our kingdom. The truth you seek lies within the palace. You must find him before it is too late. Igwe Okanga felt a mix of relief and confusion. But Ezemo, where exactly is Wenze? Who took him? The Ezemo shook his head. I don't know, Your Majesty. You must search diligently. The answers will come to you. With that, the Ezemo left, leaving the king with more questions than answers. Igwe Okanga wasted no time. He summoned his palace guards and instructed them to conduct a thorough search that night. Do not return until you have found Weze, the king commanded, his voice firm and resolute. Meanwhile, in the bush, where Weze was tied, Wedo and her friends stood before him. Wedo couldn't hide her malicious glee. Look at you, king of kings, Wedo mocked. Why are you so weak now? Obiago laughed along, enjoying the spectacle. But Nkwo felt a deep sense of remorse and guilt. Wenze was too weak to respond, his eyes filled with despair. As they made their way back to the palace, Nkwo couldn't hold back his anxiety any longer. Wedo, we need to release Wenze. If anything happens to him, we will all be in grave danger. Wedo's face hardened. No one will find out, Nkwo. Stop worrying. Obiago added, Nkwo, focus. We have come too far to back out now. Back in the palace, Wedo was summoned by Igwe Okanga. She entered the throne room, trying to mask her nervousness. Wedo, do you know anything about Wenze's whereabouts? The king asked, his gaze piercing and direct. Wedo shook her head. No, father, I haven't seen him. The king sighed deeply. The Ezemo visited me today. He said Weze is alive and within our kingdom. He also warned that the truth lies within the palace. If you are hiding anything, Wedo, you must stop. Such actions carry severe consequences. Wedo felt her heart race, but she forced herself to remain calm. I promise, father, I haven't done anything wrong. Igwe Okanga looked at her for a long moment before nodding. Very well, but remember, the gods are always watching. As she left the throne room, Wedo's heart pounded in her chest. She returned to her chambers, her mind filled with fear and doubt. Despite her determination, the weight of her actions began to bear down on her. Lolo Kanga and Igwe Okanga spent the night praying for Wenze's safe return. They knelt together, asking the gods for guidance and protection. Please, bring Wenze back to us safely, Lolo Kanga prayed, her voice filled with worry. May the gods watch over him and guide our search, Igwe Okanga added, his voice solemn. That night, Nkwo couldn't sleep. His conscience gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. He tossed and turned in his bed, his mind filled with guilt and fear. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he got up, dressed quietly, and left his house. Nkwo rode his horse towards the outskirts of the kingdom, the cool night air doing little to ease his troubled mind. He headed straight to the bush where they had tied Wenze. When he arrived, he found Wenze still tied to the tree, weak and helpless. Wenze, Nkwo whispered as he approached, I'm going to get you out of here. Wenze looked up, his eyes filled with hope and relief. Nkwo quickly untied him and helped him onto his horse. They rode back to the palace, the journey slow and conscious to avoid detection. When they reached the palace gate, Nkwo gently lowered Wenze to the ground. I'm sorry for what we did. Please forgive me, he said, his voice breaking. Wenze, too weak to respond, managed a faint nod. Nkwo mounted his horse again and rode away, his heart heavy but relieved that he had done the right thing. The next morning, the palace gatekeeper discovered Wenze lying unconscious at the gate. He hurriedly called for the king and Lolo. Your Majesty, Lolo, come quickly, the gatekeeper shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Igwe Okanga and Lolo Kanga rushed out, their heart pounding with fear. When they saw Wenze lying there, they gasped in shock. Get the guards, we need to take him inside, Igwe Okanga ordered. With the help of the palace guards, they carried Wenze into his chamber and laid him on a soft bed. The royal physician was summoned to tend to him, and Wenze was given water and food to regain his strength. We are so happy to see you back, Wenze, Lolo Kanga said, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Rest now. We will ask you questions later. Igwe Okanga nodded. Yes, let him rest. He has been through a lot. Meanwhile, word of Nweze's return spread quickly through the palace. When Wedo heard the news, her anger flared up. She stormed out of the palace and rushed to Obiago's house. Obiago, Nweze is back, she exclaimed, her voice trembling with fury. Obiago frowned. I suspected it might be Nkwo. He was never fully on board with our plan. We need to find out if it was him, Wedo said, her voice filled with determination. They hurried to Nkwo's house, but found it empty. His horse was gone as well. This is his doing, Wedo spat. He betrayed us. Feeling desperate and cornered, Wedo decided to take matters into her own hands. I will kill Nweze with my sword, she declared. Obiago shook his head. It's too late now, Wedo. Security is tight around the palace. We can't get to him. Wedo clenched her fists, her eyes burning with regret. I should have killed him when we had the chance. They returned to the palace, and as they approached, they saw Nkwo kneeling in front of the king and Lolo, confessing everything. Your Majesty, Lolo, I cannot live with the guilt any longer, Nkwo said, his voice choked with emotion. We abducted Nweze and left him in the bush, but I couldn't bear it, so I rescued him last night. Igwe Okanga's face darkened with anger and disappointment. Wedo, Obiago, come forward. Wedo's heart pounded as she approached. She knew they were in serious trouble. Wedo, how could you do this? Igwe Okanga demanded, his voice filled with sorrow. You conspired to kidnap your brother and left him to die. For what? Power? With tears streaming down her face, Wedo dropped to her knees. Father, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Lolo Kanga looked at her daughter with a mix of sadness and disbelief. Wedo, you have brought shame upon our family and the kingdom. What you did is unforgivable. Igwe Okanga shook his head, his heart heavy. The consequences of abduction and attempted murder are severe. Wedo, you must face the law. Wedo cried harder, her voice trembling. Please, Father, have mercy. I was blinded by my desire for the throne. Igwe Okanga's face softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. The law is the law, Wedo. You, Nkwo and Obiago, will be arrested and locked up. You must face the consequences of your actions. The palace guards moved forward and took hold of Wedo, Nkwo and Obiago. Wedo's heart shattered as she was led away in chains, her dreams of the throne slipping further away. Nweze, who had been resting, heard the commotion and came forward, weak but determined. Your Majesty, please, have mercy on them. I beg you to temper justice with mercy. Igwe Okanga turned to Nweze, his expression stern. Nweze, you have a kind heart, but the law must be upheld. Wedo and her friends will face the consequences of their actions. Nweze nodded, understanding the king's decision, but his heart ached for Wedo and their broken family. The future of the kingdom of Adasi was uncertain, and the bonds that had been torn apart would take time and effort to heal. Inside the dimly lit cell, Wedo sat alone, her thoughts filled with regret and sorrow. She was kept in a separate room from Obiago and Nkwo, who shared a cell. The days were long and filled with silence, giving her plenty of time to reflect on her actions. She cried often, feeling the weight of her mistakes. I have done so much wrong, Wedo whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. How could I have let my ambition blind me so much? Nweze, too, was saddened by this situation. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel sorry for his sister. He often thought about her, wishing he could do something to ease her pain. But he knew that justice had to be served. Lolo Kanga was heartbroken. She missed her daughter deeply, but she understood the necessity of their actions. Igwe Okanga felt the same. Both parents were determined to do what was right, despite the personal pain it caused them. Life in the palace continued, but a shadow of sadness lingered over it. For a month, things remained this way. The routines of the palace carried on, but the absence of Mwedo, Obiago, and Nkwo was keenly felt. In the second month, the Ezemo came to see the king. He had been in deep meditation and had a message for Igwe Okanga. Your Majesty, the Ezemo began. I believe it is time to release Mwedo, Obiago, and Nkwo. They have paid for their mistakes and should be given a chance to make amends. Igwe Okanga listened carefully and then nodded. Very well, Ezemo. We will release them. The king ordered the guards to free Nwedo, Obiago, and Nkwo. When Nwedo emerged from the cell, she was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down her face, and she saw her family waiting for her. Nwedo knelt before her parents and Nweze. Father, mother, Nweze, I am so sorry for everything I have done. Please forgive me. Lolo Kanga stepped forward and lifted Nwedo to her feet. We forgive you, Nwedo. What's important is that you have learned from your mistakes. Let's move forward together. Nweze embraced Nwedo tightly, his voice soft and forgiving. I forgive you, Nwedo. We are family, and I will always protect you. Igwe Kanga nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. We welcome you back, Nwedo. Let us heal and grow stronger together. That night, the king called Nwedo for a private discussion. They sat together in the garden, the cool night air filled with the sounds of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Nwedo, Igwe Okanga began. I want to explain why your brother will be the next king. It's not just about tradition, but also about destiny and the future of our kingdom. Nwedo listened intently, her heart open to her father's words. You are the princess of Adasi, and that will never change. Your role is unique and important. Igwe Okanga continued. But the Ezemo and the gods have shown us that Nweze is meant to lead our people. This does not diminish your value or your place in our hearts. Nwedo nodded, finally understanding. I accept that Nweze should be the king father. I see now that our kingdom needs him. Igwe Okanga smiled warmly. I am proud of you, Nwedo. You have shown great strength and humility. From that day onwards, Nwedo dedicated herself to making amends. She sought out Nkwo and Obiago, determined to rebuild their friendship. Nkwo, Obiago, I'm truly sorry for everything, Nwedo said, her voice sincere. Can we start over and rebuild our friendship? Nkwo smiled, relieved to see Nwedo's change of heart. Of course, Nwedo, let's put the past behind us. Obiago nodded in agreement. Yes, let's move forward together. The three friends embraced, their bond stronger than ever. They began training together, but now with a renewed sense of purpose and unity. As the days turned into weeks, love and peace flourished in the palace. Nwedo and Nweze grew very close, doing everything together. They spent time exploring the kingdom, learning from each other, and planning for the future. One day, as they sat together in the garden, Nwedo asked, Nweze, tell me about your mother. I would like to know more about her. Nweze's eyes softened with fond memories. She was a kind and strong woman. She passed away years ago, but she always wanted me to find my family and be part of something greater. I think she would be happy seeing us together. Lolo Kanga, who had overheard their conversation, joined them and wrapped her arms around them both. You both have my love and support. We are a family and nothing will change that. Nweze and Wedo smiled, feeling the warmth of their mother's embrace. They knew that their family had been through much, but they were stronger for it. As the months went by, the kingdom of Adasi thrived under the leadership of Igwe Okanga, Lolo Okanga, Nweze and Wedo by their side. The bond between the siblings grew stronger, and their friendship with Nkwo and Obiago flourished. The palace, once filled with tension and sorrow, was now a place of joy and harmony. The people of Adasi looked to their royal family with pride and admiration, knowing that they were in good hands. Nwedo, Nweze, and their friends continued to work together, each contributing their unique strengths to the kingdom. They learned from their past mistakes and used those lessons to build a brighter future. And so, the story of Nweze, Nwedo, and the kingdom of Adasi came to a happy and peaceful chapter. The trials they had faced only served to strengthen their bond and teach them the true meaning of family and forgiveness. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the beautiful kingdom, they knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, united by love, trust, and a shared commitment to their people. And they all lived happily together, forever united as a family and as leaders of the great kingdom of Adasi. One lesson from this story is that forgiveness and working together as a family can help us overcome mistakes and build a happy future. Even when we make bad choices, saying sorry and trying to do better can bring love and peace back into our lives. Once upon a time, in a remote town called Enugu, there lived an orphan girl named Nkechi. Nkechi stayed with her uncle in the village because her father died when she was just 5, and her mother passed away 3 years later, leaving Nkechi alone in the world. Nkechi had to stop school in primary 3, but she could read, write, and speak pidgin English. Her uncle took her in after her mother's burial, saying it would be cruel to leave Nkechi all by herself. Since then, Nkechi had been living with her uncle. One morning at 5 a.m., Nkechi was sleeping on her mat when her auntie came in. "Nkechi, what are you still doing on that mat at this time? Do you expect me to fetch water for the kids and your uncle to bath?" Her auntie shouted, raising her voice. "Auntie, it's just 5 o'clock. It's still too late to go to the stream," Nkechi said, still feeling sleepy. "See this girl, oh. You have grown wings to start talking back at me," her auntie said angrily, looking for something to hit her with. "Auntie, I'm not talking back. I just answered your question," Nkechi said. "You will get up from that mat and go to the stream now," Mrs. Uzo ordered. "Okay, auntie, let me wear my clothes first. I'm going now," Nkechi said. "You are mad," Mrs. Uzo shouted as she removed her slippers and started hitting Nkechi with. On her way to the stream, Nkechi was shedding tears and lamenting. "God, why did you take my mama and papa away from me? Now I am alone in this world. God, please help me from the hands of my evil auntie." Nkechi went to the stream to fetch water and came back with tears rolling down her eyes. "Nkechi, why are you crying?" her uncle asked. "She must have gotten into a fight," his wife quickly replied, trying to cover up what happened. "Yes, I got into a fight with a small boy on the road. So, uncle, you don't have to worry. I am okay," Nkechi said, playing along with her uncle's wife because she knew going against her would bring more trouble. "Are you okay? You are my relative and something happened to you and you are telling me not to worry. Nkechi, drop that water and go to sleep," her uncle said. "But honey, there is still work to do in the house," his wife intercepted. "Work like what? Those children inside, don't they have hands to sweep this compound and warm the food? Must Nkechi do everything in this house?" "Mr. Uzo," Nkechi's uncle said. "So this is what you are doing now, right? Having her back, But it's okay, his wife said as she angrily went inside. Chidera, Obiora, Ndu, Mr. Uzo shouted at his children, and they all came out. What are you guys still doing in bed at this time? Don't you have work to do or something? Their father asked them. Daddy, Nkechi is supposed to do everything, the children said in unison. Will you go and do the house chores and leave my presence? Mr. Uzo shouted as he left for the bathroom. So, Nkechi, you are now bribing my husband, right? Let my husband go to work and you will fill this house with water, and I will still flog you for allowing my children to stress themselves to do the chores. Mrs. Uzo said, Oh God, where will I run to now? I have nobody to help me. What will I do now? Nkechi said with tears again in her eyes. Nkechi felt trapped. She had no one to turn to and nowhere to run. She sat outside, feeling the weight of her aunt's harsh words and her uncle's misplaced trust in his wife. The sun was rising, and the morning chores awaited. Nkechi, come here. Mrs. Uzo's voice rang out from inside the house. Nkechi quickly wiped her tears and hurried inside. Her cousins, Chidera, Obiora, and Ndu, were lazily sitting around, pretending to be busy. Go to the kitchen and make breakfast for everyone, Mrs. Uzo ordered. Nkechi nodded and went to the kitchen. She knew better than to argue. She quickly gathered the ingredients and started cooking. As she worked, she couldn't help but think about her parents. She missed them so much. They used to take care of her and love her. Now she felt all alone. After a while, the smell of food filled the house. Nkechi served the food and called everyone to eat. Her cousins rushed to the table, but Mrs. Uzo was not pleased. Is this how you make breakfast? This food is tasteless, Mrs. Uzo complained. I'm sorry, Auntie. I tried my best, Nkechi said quietly. Your best is not good enough. Go and fetch more firewood now, Mrs. Uzo commanded. Nkechi nodded and left the house. She walked to the edge of the village, where there was a small forest. She gathered some firewood, all the while thinking about her parents and wishing they were still alive. When she returned home, her cousins were playing outside. Nkechi dropped the firewood in the kitchen and started cleaning the house. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, and did the laundry. Her back ached, and her hands were sore, but she didn't complain. She knew it would only make things worse. As the day turned into evening, Nkechi finally had a moment to herself. She sat outside, looking at the stars. She whispered a prayer to her parents, asking them to watch over her. Please, Mama and Papa, help me find a way out of this. I miss you so much, she said softly, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She quickly wiped her tears and turned around. It was her uncle. Nkechi, are you okay? He asked, looking concerned. Yes, uncle, I'm fine, she replied, forcing a smile. Are you sure? You have been working all day. You need to rest, he said gently. I will, uncle. Thank you, Nkechi said, feeling a small glimmer of hope. Her uncle nodded and went back inside. Nkechi sighed and looked up at the stars again. Maybe, just maybe, things will get better one day. She had to keep hoping. The next day, Mrs. Uzo poured out all the water into the drums just to punish Nkechi. She was determined to make Nkechi's life a living hell. When Nkechi saw what her auntie did, many thoughts ran through her mind. She chose to ignore all the ideas because she didn't want to disappoint her uncle. So she decided to do what she was asked to do. Later, Nkechi went outside because this time her uncle had already left for work. When she went out, her aunt was there. So, you have finally grown wings in this house, right? I asked you to do something, and you spend the entire day inside without doing anything I asked you to do. Mrs. Uzo said, trying to pick a fight with Nkechi for no reason. No, auntie, it's not like that. I was just dressing my room and waiting for my brother and sister to go to school so I could come and do it. Nkechi said, you are mad for saying that. How dare you talk back at me when I'm talking? Or did your mother give you witchcraft before she died? Her auntie said, Auntie, don't call my mama a witch. My mama was a very good woman, so I don't have witchcraft. I'm just telling you the truth. Nkechi replied. Boom! Her auntie picked up a stick and started using it on her. This time, it was very serious. While she was beating this innocent girl, her conscience didn't even tell her to stop. She beat Nkechi so badly that Nkechi was rolling on the ground, crying for help. Her kids were all there, watching in amusement at what was happening. To make matters worse, their house was isolated, so no one lived close to them. Even if they were neighbors, they wouldn't come because of Mrs. Uzo's behavior. Some minutes later, Mrs. Uzo left Nkechi and went to drop off her kids at school. Before she left, she gave Nkechi some instructions. You see those drums at the back of the house? Fill them before I come back and prepare something for me to eat when I'm back. Mrs. Uzo ordered. Nkechi, still aching from the beating, nodded quietly. As soon as her aunt left, Nkechi sat on the ground, trying to gather her strength. She wanted to cry, but she had no more tears left. She knew she had to do what her auntie asked, or things would get more worse. She slowly got up and went to fetch water from the stream. It was a long walk, and the buckets were heavy, but she kept going. She filled the drums one by one, even though her body was in pain. As she walked, she thought about her parents again. She missed them so much. She wished they were still alive to take care of her. But she knew wishing wouldn't bring them back. She had to be strong and do her best to survive. After filling the drums, Nkechi went to the kitchen to prepare food. She cooked quickly, trying to make sure everything was perfect. She didn't want to give her auntie any more reason to be angry. By the time her auntie returned, everything was done. Nkechi stood quietly, hoping she wouldn't be punished again. Is the water fetched? Mrs. Uzo asked as she walked into the kitchen. Yes, auntie, Nkechi replied. And the food? It's ready, auntie. Mrs. Uzo inspected the kitchen and the drums of water. She couldn't find anything to complain about this time, but she didn't say thank you. Instead, she nodded and went to eat. Nkechi watched her auntie eat in silence. She felt a tiny bit of relief that she wasn't being shouted at or beaten at the moment. But she knew it wouldn't last long. She had to be careful and keep doing her best to avoid more trouble. After her auntie finished eating, she looked at Nkechi and said, Tomorrow, make sure you clean the entire house before you go to the stream, and don't make me have to tell you twice. Yes, auntie, Nkechi said quietly. Nkechi went back to her small corner of the house. She lay on her mat, feeling exhausted. She closed her eyes and whispered another prayer to her parents, asking them to watch over her and give her strength. Please, Mama, and Papa, help me get through this. I miss you both so much, she said softly. As she drifted off to sleep, she hoped that one day things would get better. She had to keep believing that there was a brighter future ahead. The next morning, Nkechi woke up with pain all over her body because of the beating she received the previous day. She dared not to tell her uncle anything, and she stood up from where she slept. She started talking to herself. Where do I even start from today? These things tire me. Okay, should I fetch water first so it will be easier for me? Or should I cook first so I can forget about cooking? Or should I just sweep the floor first so it will be free for me to walk? Nkechi wondered aloud. As all these thoughts were running through Nkechi's mind, she started laughing. Chai, Mama, I miss you so much that I can't stop thinking about him. I believe you are with me in every step I take, she said to herself. A few minutes later, she decided to fetch water first. It took her almost 3 hours, but she was done. Then she moved on to sweeping the house, and within 30 minutes, she was finished. Lastly, she started cooking, and in the next hour, she was done. Nkechi arranged everything neatly, took her bath, and went back to lie down on her mat. She was hungry, but dared not to eat anything without her auntie's permission. Her auntie had gone out since morning. While resting, Nkechi started having a dream. She saw her auntie begging and asking her for forgiveness. She woke up startled and thought, is it my auntie that I know or another auntie? Because I don't understand again. Anyways, I won't sleep again before Jezebel comes and breaks my head. Some minutes later, her auntie came back and started shouting, Nkechi! Mrs. Uzo screamed her name. Nkechi heard her auntie and got up quickly. She ran to meet her, trying to hide the fear in her eyes. Yes, auntie, Nkechi replied, trembling. Did you do everything I asked you to do? Mrs. Uzo asked angrily. Yes, auntie. I fetched the water, swept the house, and I also cooked the food, Nkechi said, trying to stay calm. Mrs. Uzo inspected everything. She couldn't find any fault, but she was still not pleased. Why are you just lying around doing nothing? Don't you know you should find something else to do? She yelled. I'm sorry, auntie. I was just resting for a bit. I will find something else to do, Nkechi said quickly. Next time I see you lying around, you will regret it, Mrs. Uzo threatened. Nkechi nodded and went back to the kitchen. She started cleaning the already clean kitchen just to keep herself busy and avoid more trouble. As she cleaned, she thought about her dream. She wondered why she saw her auntie begging her for forgiveness. It seemed so impossible. Her auntie was always so mean and never showed any kindness. Hours passed, and Nkechi kept herself busy with various chores. She dared not to rest again, fearing her auntie's wrath. When her uncle came back from work, he noticed Nkechi was unusually quiet. Nkechi, are you okay? Her uncle asked with concern. Yes, uncle, I am fine, Nkechi replied, forcing a smile. You look tired. Have you eaten anything today? He asked. Nkechi hesitated, not wanting to get into trouble. Uncle, I'm fine, no. Don't worry about me. Her uncle looked at her with pity, but didn't push further. He knew his wife's temper and didn't want to make things worse for Nkechi. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Nkechi served the food. Her cousins ate quickly, not paying much attention to her. Her auntie, however, kept a close eye on her. Nkechi, why are you not eating? Mrs. Uzo asked with a smile. I'm not very hungry, Auntie. Nkechi lied. Suit yourself, Mrs. Uzo said, looking pleased with herself. After dinner, Nkechi cleared the table and washed the dishes. She was exhausted, but she knew she couldn't rest until everyone else had gone to bed. Finally, when the house was quiet, Nkechi went to her mat and lay down. She whispered another prayer to her parents, asking for their help and strength. Please, Mama and Papa, watch over me and give me the strength to get through this. Please, she said softly. As she drifted off to sleep, she hoped that one day things would get better. She had to keep believing in a brighter future. The next day went as usual for Nkechi. After she finished her chores, she felt weak and terribly hungry because she hadn't eaten the previous night. Desperate, she took some soup from the pot to eat. Afterward, she decided to rest a bit before her auntie returned. Nkechi so much wanted to go back to school, but she must not say it in that house. Welcome, Auntie, Nkechi greeted when she saw her auntie return, but she didn't respond. A few minutes later, Nkechi heard her calling her name. Ah, what did I do that she's shouting my name like that? Is my dream coming to reality? Nkechi wondered as she headed out to meet her auntie. Yes, Auntie, I'm here, Nkechi said. Where were you? And who dished the soup for you? Her auntie asked. Auntie, it was me who dished it, Nkechi replied. As what now? As madam of the house, eh? Her auntie asked. No, ma, no, Nkechi said. Did you just say that you are the madam? She barked, pretending not to hear Nkechi. No, that's not what I said, ma, I swear. Nkechi defended herself. Nkechi. So your witchcraft has increased to this extent. You are not calling me deaf, Abby? Boom. Normally, she would remove her shoe to use it on Nkechi. But this time, Nkechi dodged it and they started running around the house. Nkechi, are you mad? You are using me to do marathon, Abby? Mrs. Uzo said. No, ma, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well because of the beating yesterday. Please don't add to it. You are playing with fire. Nkechi, will you stop there? Her auntie said. But Nkechi continued running for her life. Then, suddenly, Mrs. Uzo tripped and fell down. Nkechi didn't notice and kept running. Some minutes later, Nkechi returned back and realized her auntie wasn't chasing her anymore. She had to turn back, getting close to the house. She saw her auntie lying on the floor. Should I help her or should I not? Nkechi wondered. Her heart raced as she approached Mrs. Uzo, lying still on the ground. Nkechi's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She was scared of what might happen next, but she couldn't just leave her auntie there. With a deep breath, Nkechi decided to help. She knelt down beside her and gently shook her shoulder. Auntie, are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Uzo groaned and slowly opened her eyes. She seemed disoriented, but not seriously hurt. Nkechi helped her sit up. Are you hurt, Auntie? Nkechi asked, genuinely concerned. Mrs. Uzo looked at her with a mix of surprise and anger. What are you doing? Come on, get away from me. She snapped, pushing Nkechi's hand away. I'm sorry, Auntie. I just wanted to help, Nkechi said softly, stepping back. Mrs. Uzo struggled to her feet, still glaring at Nkechi. Don't think this changes anything. You are still a useless girl, very useless, she hissed, before limping inside the house. Nkechi sighed in relief that her auntie wasn't badly hurt, but felt a pang of sadness at her harsh words. She quietly followed her inside. unsure of what would happen next. Inside the house, Mrs. Uzo sat down and rubbed her sore ankle. Nkechi stood nearby, waiting for any further instructions. Go and finish the rest of your chores, you useless girl, Mrs. Uzo ordered, her tone less fierce but still stern. Yes, auntie, Nkechi replied and quickly went to complete her tasks. As she worked, Nkechi couldn't stop thinking about her dream. It seemed so impossible that her auntie would ever beg her for forgiveness. But the incident today made her wonder if things might change, even just a little bit. Later that evening, Nkechi prepared dinner and served it as usual. Her uncle came home and everyone sat down to eat. He noticed the tension but didn't say anything. Nkechi ate quietly, grateful that she had managed to get some food earlier and could now join the family without feeling too weak. After dinner, Nkechi cleaned up and went to her mat to rest. That night, Mrs. Uzo told her husband how Nkechi had pushed her and showed him her injury. But her husband wasn't buying it because he knew the kind of wife he had married. My wife, please let this child rest. You and I know Nkechi wouldn't do this to you, her husband said, trying to hold her, but she pushed his hands away. Is that what you are saying? Okay, no problem, Mrs. Uzo said angrily and turned to the other side of the bed. Meanwhile, Nkechi was scared inside, worried that her auntie would tell her uncle lies that he would believe. She knew her auntie had been looking for a way to poison her uncle's heart against her. Oh my God, my own is finished. How will I do it? Where will I start from? Where will I even stay? Ah, my uncle will finish me. Nkechi was thinking aloud. Nkechi slept off worrying because she slept late. She was still sleeping when her uncle and cousins left the house. She was woken up by a whip from her auntie. Nkechi sprang up, surprised that her auntie was up and out of the blue. Nkechi heard her auntie's voice. Nkechi, pack your things and get out of my house. I cannot feed you again, not anymore. Leave. Mrs. Uzo finally dropped the bomb. Auntie, please, I don't have anywhere to go to. Where you want make I run go? Auntie, I beg, just pity me or beat me as you always do. Auntie, I beg, no throw away me, I beg. Nkechi said as she knelt down and begged her auntie. You are mad. You are very, very mad. Better go inside now and pack your things from that house before I close and open my eyes. You are out of here. Her auntie said with an angry face. Auntie, please now, please, please, please. It's like you don't want to go with any of your things, Abby. As it is now, you are leaving my house right now, her auntie maintained. Some minutes later, her auntie went inside, brought out Nkechi's things along with a long cane to chase Nkechi away. Pack your things out of this house now, her auntie ordered. Some minutes later, Nkechi finally agreed to pack her things and leave. But before Nkechi left, she made a statement. If I have done any bad thing to you, it won't be well with me wherever I am going. But if I haven't done any bad thing to you, it shall be well with me in any way possible. Amen, she said as she left the compound. Nkechi walked down the road, carrying her small bag of belongings. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do next. She felt scared and alone, but she also felt a sense of relief. At least, she was free from her auntie's constant abuse. As she walked, she thought about her parents. Mama, Papa, please guide me. I don't know what to do or where to go, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The sun was setting, and Nkechi still hadn't found a place to stay. She was exhausted and hungry. She sat down by the side of the road, trying to think of a plan. Just then, a kind looking woman approached her. Hello there. Why are you sitting here all alone? The woman asked gently. Nkechi looked up, her eyes red from crying. I have nowhere to go. My auntie sent me away, she said, her voice trembling. The woman looked concerned. Oh, there. That's terrible. What's your name? She asked. My name is Nkechi, she replied. Well, Nkechi, my name is Mrs. Nwosu. You can't stay out here all night. Come with me. You can stay at my house for tonight, she offered. Nkechi hesitated for a moment, but she had no other option. She stood up and followed Mrs. Nwosu to her house. It was a small cozy home, filled with warmth and kindness. Sit down, Nkechi. I will get you something to eat, Mrs. Nwosu said as she went to the kitchen. Nkechi sat down, feeling a bit more relaxed. She looked around the house and saw photos of Mrs. Nwosu and her family. She wondered if she would ever have a family that loved her like that. A few minutes later, Mrs. Nwosu returned with a plate of food. Here you go, Nkechi, eat up, she said with a smile. Thank you, ma, Nkechi said, gratefully as she began to eat. The food tasted delicious and she felt a bit of her strength returning. After dinner, Mrs. Nwosu showed Nkechi to a small room with a bed. You can sleep here tonight. We will talk more in the morning, she said kindly. Thank you so much, ma, Nkechi said, feeling a sense of relief. As she lay down on the bed, Nkechi felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things were starting to get better. She prayed once more, thanking God for bringing Mrs. Nwosu into her life. Meanwhile, at Mr. Uzo's house, he returned from work and took a bath. Afterward, he noticed he hadn't seen or heard Nkechi's voice, so he decided to ask his wife, Where is Nkechi? I haven't seen her since I came back from work. Mr. Uzo asked. Feeling unconcerned, his wife replied, My husband. You won't believe what happened. Imagine, she packed her bag and left, saying that she's tired of us in this house. She said you are very wicked and that she can't afford to stay in this house with you again. Mrs. Uzo lied. In disbelief, Mr. Uzo listened. He knew his wife was lying. What are you saying? Can Nkechi even look at you? Talk more of saying all this trash that came out of your mouth. Mr. Uzo blasted. He continued, See, let me tell you something. You better start looking for that girl. If not, this house will not contain the both of us. Anger was written all over his face. His wife, still not bothered, replied, I don't know what you are saying. I don't know her whereabouts, she replied to her husband, who was already out of her sight. Back at Mrs. Nwosu's house, Nkechi laid on the bed that was given to her, with fear all over her. She didn't know the woman from anywhere, so she made a silent prayer. Oh God, please protect me from any evil, Nkechi said as she fell asleep. The next morning, Nkechi woke up feeling a bit more rested, but still unsure about what the day would bring. She got up from the bed and looked around the small room. It was simple but cozy, and it felt safe. Just then, Mrs. Nwosu knocked on the door and came in. Good morning, Nkechi. Hope you slept well, she asked kindly. Good morning, ma. Yes, I slept well, thank you, Nkechi replied politely. Good. Come to the kitchen there. I have made breakfast, Mrs. Nwosu said with a warm smile. Nkechi followed her to the kitchen, where a delicious aroma filled the air. Mrs. Nwosu had prepared a hearty meal of yam and eggs. Nkechi's stomach growled in anticipation. Sit down and eat, Nkechi, Mrs. Nwosu said, as she placed a plate in front of her. Thank you, ma, Nkechi said, gratefully as she began to eat. The food was delicious. After breakfast, Mrs. Nwosu sat down with Nkechi. Nkechi, I want to help you, but I need to know what happened. Why did your auntie send you away? She asked gently. Nkechi looked down at her hands, unsure of how to begin. She took a deep breath and started to tell her story. She spoke about her parents' death, moving in with her uncle and auntie, and the constant abuse she faced from Mrs. Ozo. Tears filled Mrs. Nwosu's eyes as she listened. Oh, my dear child, you have been through so much, she said, reaching out to hold Nkechi's hand. Yes, ma, it has been very hard, Nkechi replied, feeling a bit of relief from sharing her story. Don't worry, Nkechi. You are safe here. I will help you, Mrs. Nwosu said firmly. Thank you so much, ma. I don't know what I would have done without your help, Nkechi said, her voice filled with gratitude. You are welcome, my dear. Now, let's think about what to do next. Do you want to go back to school? Mrs. Nwosu asked. Nkechi's eyes lit up. Yes, ma. I want to go back to school. I miss learning and being with other children, she said eagerly. Okay, we will work on that. For now, you can stay here with me. We'll find a way to make things better, Mrs. Nwosu assured her. As the days passed, Nkechi settled into her new life with Mrs. Nwosu. She helped with the house chores and spent time reading books that Mrs. Nwosu provided. She felt happier and more hopeful than she had been in a long time. Back at Mr. Uzo's house, things were tense. He was still angry with his wife for sending Nkechi away. He knew he had to find her and bring her back. One evening, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, asking people if they have seen Nkechi. After several hours of searching, he finally got a lead from a neighbor who had seen a young girl walking with Mrs. Nwosu. Mr. Uzo hurried to Mrs. Nwosu's house and knocked on the door. When Mrs. Nwosu opened the door, he asked, Good morning, ma. I'm looking for a girl named Nkechi. Have you seen her? Mrs. Nwosu looked at him with suspicion. Who are you? And why are you looking for her? She asked. I'm her uncle, Mr. Uzo. Nkechi was staying with us, but my wife sent her away. I need to bring her back home, he explained. Nkechi is here with me. She told me about the abuse she faced at your house. I cannot just let her go back there, Mrs. Nwosu said firmly. Mr. Uzo sighed. I understand. My wife was wrong to treat her that way. I want to make things right. Please, let me speak with Nkechi, he pleaded. Mrs. Nwosu thought for a moment and then nodded. Okay, but you must promise that you protect her from any harm, she said. I promise, Mr. Uzo said sincerely. Mrs. Nwosu called Nkechi and she came to the door. When she saw her uncle, she felt a mix of fear and relief. Nkechi, I am so sorry for what happened. I didn't know things were so bad. Please come back home with me. I will make sure you are safe, Mr. Uzo said, his eyes filled with regret. Nkechi looked at him, unsure of what to do. She felt safe with Mrs. Nwosu, but also missed her cousins and the familiarity of her uncle's house. Nkechi, you can stay here as long as you want. The choice is yours, Mrs. Nwosu said gently. After a long moment of thinking, Nkechi finally said, Uncle, I will come back, but only if you promise that Auntie won't hurt me anymore. I promise, Nkechi. I will protect you, Mr. Uzo said, his voice firm. With that, Nkechi hugged Mrs. Nwosu and thanked her for her kindness. She then followed her uncle back to his house, hoping that things would truly be better this time. Nkechi walked back to her uncle's house with mixed emotion. She was grateful to Mrs. Nwosu for her kindness, but nervous about returning to a place where she had suffered so much. When they arrived, Mr. Uzo turned to Nkechi and said, Remember, you are safe here. I will not let anyone hurt you. Nkechi nodded, though she still felt a bit uneasy. As they entered the house, Mrs. Uzo was sitting in the living room, pretending to be busy with some sewing. When she saw Nkechi, she frowned, but didn't say anything. Mr. Uzo guided Nkechi to her room and helped her settle back. Are you okay, Nkechi? He asked, looking concerned. Yes, uncle. I am fine. Nkechi replied, though her heart was still pounding. Good. If you need anything, just call me. I'm here for you, Mr. Uzo said before leaving the room. Over the next few days, Nkechi tried her best to avoid Mrs. Uzo. He did her chores quietly and stayed out of her auntie's way as much as possible. Meanwhile, Mr. Uzo kept a close eye on things, making sure his wife didn't mistreat Nkechi again. One afternoon, Mr. Uzo called Nkechi into the living room. Nkechi, I have been thinking. I know you want to go back to school. I'll make arrangements for you to start classes again, he said with a smile. Nkechi's eyes lit up with joy. Thank you, uncle. Thank you so much, she exclaimed, feeling a wave of happiness wash over her. But you must promise me one thing, Mr. Uzo continued. You must focus on your studies and do your best. Education is important. I promise, uncle. I will work very hard, Nkechi said earnestly. The next week, Nkechi was enrolled in a nearby school. She was excited but also nervous about meeting new people and catching up on her studies. On her first day, she dressed in her new uniform and walked to school with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. When she arrived, the teacher introduced her to the class. Everyone, this is Nkechi. She will be joining us from today. Please make her feel welcome, the teacher said. The other children smiled and waved, and Nkechi felt a bit more at ease. As the day went on, she found herself enjoying the lessons and making new friends. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful about the future. Back at home, things were slowly improving as well. Mr. Uzo kept his promise and made sure Mrs. Uzo didn't mistreat Nkechi. He also talked to his children, explaining that they should help out with the chores and treat Nkechi with respect. One evening, as they all sat down for dinner, Mr. Uzo said, I am proud of you, Nkechi. I heard from your teacher that you are doing very well in school. Nkechi smiled. Thank you, uncle. I really like school. That's good to hear. Keep it up, Mr. Uzo said with a warm smile. Mrs. Uzo sat quietly, still not happy about the situation, but knowing she had to keep her behavior in check. She had learned that her husband was serious about protecting Nkechi. As the days turned into weeks, Nkechi continued to thrive at school. She made more friends and enjoyed learning new things. Her teachers were impressed with her determination and hard work. One day after school, Nkechi was walking home when she saw Mrs. Nwosu in the market. She ran to her and gave her a big hug. Mrs. Nwosu, I'm so happy to see you again, Nkechi exclaimed. Nkechi, my dear, how are you? Mrs. Nwosu asked, smiling warmly. I am fine, auntie. I am back in school, and things are better at home, Nkechi said, her eyes shining with happiness. That is wonderful to hear. I knew you were a strong girl. Keep doing your best, Mrs. Nwosu said, patting Nkechi on the back. Thank you, auntie, I will, Nkechi replied. As Nkechi continued to walk home, she felt a sense of gratitude. She had faced many challenges, but she was determined to overcome them. With the support of her uncle and new friends, she knew she could achieve anything she set her mind to. Life was getting better for Nkechi. She was doing well in school and making friends. Her uncle, Mr. Uzo, was very proud of her, but Mrs. Uzo was not happy. She didn't like seeing Nkechi outshining her own daughters in school. She decided she had to do something to stop Nkechi. One evening, Mrs. Uzo made a plan. She thought the only way to get rid of Nkechi was to get rid of her husband first. She knew Mr. Uzo would always protect Nkechi, so she decided to poison him. The next morning, Mrs. Uzo woke up early and prepared breakfast. She made Mr. Uzo's favorite meal and added poison to the food. As they sat down to eat, Nkechi noticed something was different. Good morning, Uncle, Nkechi said, sitting down at the table. Good morning, Nkechi. Mr. Uzo replied with a smile. He started eating his breakfast, not knowing it was poisoned. Mrs. Uzo watched him closely, pretending to be busy with the children. After breakfast, Mr. Uzo got ready to go to work, but soon after he began to feel very sick. He clutched to his stomach and fell to the floor. Uncle, what's wrong? Nkechi cried, rushing to his side. I don't know. I feel so sick. Mr. Uzo groaned in pain. Mrs. Uzo pretended to be shocked. What happened? Maybe it's something he ate, she said, trying to hide her guilt. Nkechi was in tears. She didn't know what to do. She ran to get help, but by the time she returned with a neighbor, Mr. Uzo was already gone. Nkechi cried, knowing that her protector was no more. At the funeral, Nkechi felt lost and alone. She knew that without her uncle, Mrs. Uzo would be free to do whatever she wanted to her. Nkechi feared the worst. After the funeral, Nkechi returned to the house. Mrs. Uzo didn't waste any time, so she called Nkechi into the living room. Nkechi, from now on, you will do all the chores in this house. You will cook, you will clean, and you will take care of my children. Do you understand? Mrs. Uzo said harshly. Nkechi nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. She felt trapped and scared. She knew there was no one left to protect her. Days turned into weeks, and Mrs. Uzo made Nkechi's life miserable. She made her work from morning till night. Nkechi was no longer allowed to go to school. She missed her friends and teachers, but most of all, she missed her uncle. One evening, as Nkechi was washing dishes, she heard a knock on the door. It was one of her classmates, Ada. Nkechi, we have missed you at school. What happened? Why aren't you coming to school anymore? Ada asked, concerned. Nkechi looked around nervously. I can't go to school anymore. My uncle is gone, and my auntie doesn't want me to go, she whispered. That's not fair. You are one of the best students in our class. You need to come back, Ada insisted. I wish I could, but there is nothing I can do, Ada, Nkechi said sadly. Ada left, promising to find a way to help. Nkechi felt a glimmer of hope, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. That night, Nkechi cried herself to sleep, praying for a miracle. She didn't know how she would survive in this house without her uncle. She remembered how proud he was of her and how he encouraged her to study hard. The next day, Nkechi continued with her chores. She cooked, cleaned, and took care of the children. Mrs. Uzo watched her every move, making sure she didn't have a moment to rest. Nkechi, have you finished washing the clothes? Mrs. Uzo yelled from the kitchen. Yes, auntie, I'm almost done, Nkechi replied, scrubbing harder. Hurry up! You still have to clean the living room and prepare dinner, Mrs. Uzo snapped. Nkechi walked as fast as she could, but she was tired and hungry. She hadn't eaten proper meal since her uncle died. She missed her old life and wished she could go back to school. As she was cleaning the living room, Nkechi found one of her school books under the couch. She opened it and began to read. For a moment, she forgot about her troubles. She was lost in the world of stories and knowledge. Eh? What are you doing? Mrs. Uzo's voice startled her. I told you to clean, not to read, you this stupid girl. I'm sorry, auntie. I was just taking a short break, Nkechi said, quickly closing the book. Put that book away and get to work, now, Mrs. Uzo ordered. Nkechi obeyed, but she couldn't stop thinking about her school and her dreams. She knew she had to find a way to continue her education. Her uncle had believed in her, and she didn't want to let him down. One night, as Nkechi lay on her mat, she made a decision. She would find a way to escape and go back to school. She knew it would be dangerous, but she had to try. She couldn't let her auntie destroy her future. The next morning, Nkechi woke up early and started her chores. She worked hard, but she was also planning her escape. She gathered her few belongings and hid them under her mat. That evening, After everyone went to bed, Nkechi quietly got up and slipped out of the house. She ran as fast as she could, not looking back. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get away from Mrs. Ozo. As she ran, she prayed for guidance and protection. She remembered her uncle's words and felt a surge of strength. She knew she had to be brave and keep going no matter what. Nkechi wandered the street, unsure of where to go. She walked aimlessly, her mind racing with thoughts of her uncle and the harsh words of her aunt. She felt completely lost and hopeless. She remembered all the times her uncle had been kind to her, and now he was gone. She had nowhere to turn. Hours passed and Nkechi found herself near the market, where she had once seen Mrs. Nwosu. She remembered the kind woman and decided to seek her out. She had forgotten her house address, so she decided to go into the market and ask passerbys and shopkeepers if they knew Mrs. Nwosu. Finally, a kind vendor pointed her in the right direction. Yes, I know Mrs. Nwosu. She lives just down that street, the vendor said, pointing towards a narrow lane. Nkechi made her way to Mrs. Nwosu's house, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She knocked on the door, and after a moment, Mrs. Nwosu opened it. Nkechi, my dear, what are you doing here? What happened? Mrs. Nwosu asked, concern etched on her face. Nkechi burst into tears. Auntie, my uncle is dead, and his wife is bent on destroying me. I had to run for my life, she sobbed. Mrs. Nwosu wrapped her arms around Nkechi, holding her tightly. Oh, my dear child, come inside. You can stay with me, she said gently. Nkechi felt a glimmer of hope as she stepped into Mrs. Nwosu's house again. The warmth and kindness of the woman made her feel safe. If only for a moment, Mrs. Nwosu led her to a small cozy room with a bed, that same room. This will be your room, Nkechi. Make yourself comfortable. Over the next few days, Nkechi settled into Mrs. Nwosu's home again. She helped with chores and continued her studies. Mrs. Nwosu enrolled her in a new school, and Nkechi found solace in her studies, trying to make her uncle proud. She was grateful for the chance to continue her education and worked hard to do well in her classes. Though she was still grieving and scared, Nkechi was determined to keep going. She knew her uncle would want her to succeed and find happiness. With the support of Mrs. Nwosu and her new friends, Nkechi began to rebuild her life, holding onto the memory of her uncle and the lessons he had taught her. As the weeks went by, Nkechi excelled in school, just as she had before. She made new friends who admired her strength and determination. She felt a sense of belonging she had never known. Her teachers praised her for her hard work and dedication, and she started to believe in herself more and more. One evening, as she sat with Mrs. Nwosu, Nkechi said, Auntie, thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you. Mrs. Nwosu smiled and patted her back. Nkechi, you are a strong and brave girl. Your uncle will be so proud of you. Keep working hard and never give up, she said. Nkechi nodded, her heart filled with gratitude and determination. She knew her journey was far from over, but with the love and support of those around her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Weeks turned into months, and Nkechi continued to thrive in her new environment. Mrs. Nwosu's home had become a place of comfort and security for her. Nkechi's hard work and determination were paying off, and she was doing exceptionally well in school. One sunny afternoon, as Nkechi was coming back from school, she noticed a group of children playing in the yard. They were laughing and seemed so happy. For a moment, Nkechi remembered her life before everything changed. She missed her uncle dearly, but she also felt a new sense of belonging and hope. Inside the house, Mrs. Nwosu was busy preparing dinner. Nkechi, you are home. How was school today? She asked with a warm smile. It was good, Auntie. I got an A on my math test, Nkechi replied proudly, holding up her test paper. Mrs. Nwosu beamed with pride. That's wonderful, Nkechi. Keep up the good work, she said, giving Nkechi a hug. As they sat down for dinner, Nkechi couldn't help but feel grateful for the second chance she had been given. She was determined to make the most of it. After dinner, Nkechi helped Mrs. Nwosu with the dishes and then went to her room to do her homework. When she finished her homework, she joined Mrs. Nwosu at the living room as they watched the TV. Nkechi, I have some good news for you. Your school is having a scholarship competition and I think you should enter. The winner gets their school fees paid for the entire year. Nkechi's eyes lit up. Really, Auntie? That would be amazing. I'll work really hard to win, she said excitedly. I know you will, Nkechi. You have a bright future ahead of you, Mrs. Nwosu said, smiling warmly. The days that followed were filled with hard work and preparation for the scholarship competition. Nkechi spent hours studying, determined to do her best. Mrs. Nwosu helped her whenever she could, providing encouragement and support. On the day of the competition, Nkechi was nervous but ready. She walked into the school hall where other students were gathered, all eager to compete. The tests were challenging, but Nkechi remained focused and gave it her all. After what felt like an eternity, the results were finally announced. Nkechi's heart pounded as she waited to hear the names of the winners. And the first place winner of the scholarship competition is Nkechi, the announcer declared. Nkechi's eyes filled with tears of joy as she walked up to receive her certificate. She couldn't believe it. She had won. She thought of her uncle and how proud he would be. When she got home, Mrs. Nwosu was waiting for her. How did it go, Nkechi? She asked eagerly. I won, Auntie. I won the scholarship, Nkechi exclaimed, holding up her certificate. Mrs. Nwosu hugged her tightly. I knew you could do it, Nkechi. I'm so proud of you, she said, tears of happiness in her eyes. That night, as Nkechi lay in bed, she thought about how far she had come. She had faced so many challenges, but she had never given up. With the love and support of Mrs. Nwosu, she had found a new family and a new sense of purpose. She knew that there would still be obstacles ahead, but she was ready to face them. Years flew by, and Nkechi continued to excel in her studies. She worked really hard, determined to make the most of the opportunities she had been given. Mrs. Nwosu was always there to support her, providing encouragement and love. Nkechi's hard work paid off. She graduated from secondary school with top honors, making everyone proud. On the day of her graduation, there was a special ceremony where she was recognized for her achievement. The principal took to the stage, beaming with pride. Today, we have a special announcement. One of our students has excelled in her studies and has been awarded a scholarship by the Enugu state government to study abroad. This scholarship goes to Nkechi. The audience erupted in applause as Nkechi walked up to the stage to receive her certificate. Tears of joy filled her eyes. She couldn't believe it. She was going to study abroad. When Nkechi returned home that evening, she found Mrs. Nwosu waiting for her with open arms. I'm so proud of you, my daughter. You have worked so hard, and you deserve this opportunity, Mrs. Nwosu said, hugging her tightly. Mother, I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for everything, Nkechi said, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Nwosu wiped Nkechi's tears away. You are like the child I never had, Nkechi. You have brought so much joy into my life. I am so grateful for you, she said, smiling warmly. Nkechi knew that this opportunity was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. She prepared for her journey to Canada with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Mrs. Nwosu helped her pack, giving her advice and encouragement. On the day of her departure, Nkechi and Mrs. Nwosu went to the airport. Remember, my child, always stay true to yourself and work hard. I know you will do great things, Mrs. Nwosu said, holding Nkechi's hand. I will, mother. I promise to make you proud, Nkechi replied, hugging her tightly. As Nkechi boarded the plane, she waved goodbye to Mrs. Nwosu, feeling a mix of sadness and excitement. She knew this was the start of a new chapter in her life. In Canada, Nkechi was determined to excel. She studied diligently, always keeping in touch with Mrs. Nwosu. They exchanged letters and phone calls, sharing updates about their lives. Kechi told her foster mom about her classes, new friends, and the beautiful sights of Canada. Mrs. Nwosu was thrilled to hear about Nkechi's experiences. She was proud of how well Nkechi was doing and always encouraged her to keep striving for excellence. One evening, as Nkechi sat in her dorm room, she received a letter from Mrs. Nwosu. It read, "Dear Nkechi, my daughter, I am so proud of you and all that you have achieved. You have brought so much joy into my life, and I am grateful every day for the blessing of having you as my daughter. Remember, no matter where you are, you will always have a home with me. Keep working hard and making your dreams come true. I believe in you. With all my love, your beloved mother." Nkechi's eyes filled with tears as she read the letter. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and love for Mrs. Nwosu. She knew that no matter how far she was, she would always carry the lessons and love from her foster mom with her. Years passed, and Nkechi continued to excel in her studies. She graduated from the university with top honors, making everyone proud. She stayed in Canada, building a successful career and making a name for herself. Through it all, Nkechi never forgot where she came from. She kept in touch with her mother. They remained close, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Nkechi knew that she had been given a second chance at life, thanks to the love and support of Mrs. Nwosu. She was determined to make the most of it and to give back to those who had helped her along the way. Finally, Nkechi returned to Nigeria. She was filled with joy and excitement to return home and give back to her community. With the help of her foster mom, Mrs. Nwosu, she made plans to build a clinic in her village. They worked hard to gather resources, and soon, the clinic was up and running. The clinic became a beacon of hope for the villagers. Nkechi, now known as Dr. Nkechi, dedicated herself to providing the best care possible. She was loved and respected by everyone in the community for her kindness and dedication. One day, while attending to patients in the clinic, Nkechi was called urgently. A woman had been rushed in very sick. Nkechi quickly went to see the patient and was shocked to recognize her as Mrs. Uzo, her uncle's wife. However, Mrs. Uzo did not recognize Nkechi. Chidera, Mrs. Uzo's daughter, was the one who brought her mother to the clinic. She looked worn out and worried. Nkechi approached them, her heart heavy with mixed emotion. "Please, help my mother," Chidera pleaded. Not realizing who Nkechi was, Nkechi took a deep breath and introduced herself. "Chidera, it's me, Nkechi," she said softly. Chidera's eyes widened in shock. "Nkechi, is it really you?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, it is me. I'm here to help," Nkechi replied, her voice gentle and reassuring. Mrs. Uzo, upon hearing Nkechi's name, looked up with a mixture of fear and shame. She tried to speak, but words failed her. The realization of who Nkechi was hit her hard, and she panicked. Moments later, she gave up the ghost. Right there in the clinic, Nkechi felt a deep sadness as she watched Mrs. Uzo pass away. Despite everything that had happened in the past, she had never wished for anyone to suffer. She knelt beside Chidera, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "Chidera, I'm so sorry," Nkechi said, holding her cousin's hand. Chidera, through her tears, began to speak. "Nkechi, our life has been so hard since our father died. We had to drop out of school, and we have struggled to survive," she said, her voice trembling. Nkechi felt a surge of compassion for her cousins. Despite the pain and hardship she had endured at the hands of Mrs. Uzo, she couldn't ignore the suffering of Chidera and her siblings. "Chidera, I will help you," Nkechi said firmly. "You and your siblings deserve a chance at a better life. I will support and make sure you can go back to school and have a brighter future." Chidera looked at Nkechi with gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Nkechi. We don't deserve your kindness after everything," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right," Nkechi replied, hugging her cousin. With determination, Nkechi made arrangements to support Chidera and her siblings. She enrolled them back at school and provided their needs. The clinic continued to thrive, helping many people in the village. Kechi and Mrs. Nwosu worked together to ensure that the community had access to good healthcare and education. The villagers were grateful for their effort, and the clinic became a symbol of hope and compassion. Years passed, and Chidera and her siblings excelled in their studies, just like Nkechi had. They were determined to make the most of the opportunities they had been given. Nkechi felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had made a positive impact on their lives. Nkechi's journey had come full circle. From a young girl who had lost everything, she had risen to become a beacon of hope and love in her community. She had turned her pain into purpose, and her story inspired many. As she looked out at the bright future ahead of her and her family, Nkechi knew that she had found her true calling. She had learned that kindness, compassion, and determination. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Nkechi and her struggles on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with her journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.